There are two ways you can go in a special session in the General Assembly. And typically the way it happens is the governor calls you in. The governor issues a call, we call it the call. That call stipulates, specifies what you can take up. The governor puts whatever needs to be handled in the call, and we come in, we address that, and then we go back home. The other way, pursuant to our Constitution, is the General Assembly can call itself into special session as long as 2/3 of each chamber, the Senate and the House, agree to call themselves into the special session. Prior to last week, or week before last, that had only happened twice in our state's entire history. One was the General Assembly called itself in to ratify an amendment to the United States Constitution, and then the other was largely ceremonial. They called itself in order to convene the General Assembly in Knoxville for the World's Fair. So literally we made history week before last, because not only did we call ourselves in, the General Assembly called itself in, but we called ourselves in to contemplate substantive law in the state of Tennessee. What led to that? Well, you all know the last 20, 21 months, whatever, have been a nightmare. A lot of decisions made, good, bad, indifferent. But I think we can probably all agree that there are forces out there who have weaponized not only the virus, but they have weaponized the vaccine. They have weaponized masks. They've weaponized mitigation efforts. And that's not good, and that's not healthy. And that all culminated and came to a head, in my view, on September 9th. When the President of the United States did something that if it didn't scare you to death, it should have. The President of the United States issues an executive order that says in order to keep your job, you have to receive an injection of a vaccine. If you work for an employer who employs more than 100 people, you have to get vaccinated. A mandate. Congress didn't pass it. It would be bad enough if they said that you got to do it. One person in the United States of America issued an executive order. That, my friends, is terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. Now, leading up to that, conversations were ongoing about we need a special session. The way I explained it when I was presenting the legislation in the General Assembly, folks, we got to get this behind us. Now, COVID is still here. There's still people getting it. There's still people dying from it. I recognize and acknowledge that. But we have to get our lives back on track. And as a state, we need to have guardrails. We need to have parameters within which we're going to move on with our lives and put this terrible chapter of our lives behind us, okay? And that was the purpose of the legislation. So we call ourselves in the General Assembly. The Lieutenant Governor, Speaker of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House both adopted a number of bills, or drafted a number of bills, asked members to sponsor those bills, and I was flattered that the Lieutenant Governor asked me to carry what we refer to as the COVID Omnibus Bill that dealt with vaccine mandates and also mask mandates and a few other things in there as well. So, so we came in week before last and passed this legislation. And I'm going to hit the high points, and if you all want to ask questions about it, we can do a deeper dive. First and foremost, we said in the state of Tennessee, it is unlawful for anyone to ask you whether or not you've been vaccinated. Period. You can't do it. I don't care if you're a business, you're a governmental entity, you're a school, it doesn't matter. You cannot compel someone to show you their proof of vaccination. We don't care what the president says. If a company wants to have a vaccine mandate, that's fine. But you can't ask anybody to show you proof. That is your personal medical information. I believe it is super protected. It's that simple. We're just going to say you can't ask anybody to show you proof. And so that happened. Furthermore, we said that if a business, prior to the passage of this law, fires you because you didn't want to get vaccinated, then you're entitled to unemployment compensation. Now, that's of small comfort to someone who loses their job, I understand. But understand the chilling effect that has on the business community. If you've owned and operated a business, you know one of the things you watch very, very closely are your unemployment compensation premiums. The more people you fire and end up on unemployment, the higher up your premiums go. So it's a significant deterrent. We also said that that would be enforced prospectively. So if you fire someone, or you take an adverse action against them from an employment standpoint, they lose their job because they want to get vaccinated. Well, if this becomes law, that would be unlawful. That person has a private right of action against the employer, and again, they're eligible for unemployment compensation. So, is it perfect? No. Lots of questions about healthcare workers and why we exempted out healthcare, and that was very, very painful. And there were lots and lots of hours and hours and hours of discussion about that. The Tennessee Constitution says that you cannot impair a contract. You cannot take legislative action to impair a contract. I'm looking at my counselor over there to make sure he's nodding his head. So healthcare providers have a contractual relationship with CMS, with Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement. And in theory, it would be unconstitutional if we did something that impaired that contract. So the Biden administration, they've already weaponized everything else. Why would they not weaponize Medicare and Medicaid payments to our healthcare providers? And if they decided to pull those and yank those, our entire healthcare industry in Tennessee would shut down. So that's part of the problem that we had, and we wrestled with it ad nauseum, trying to figure out a way to address it. Ultimately, we decided for the greater good of trying to get something that would withstand judicial scrutiny, it made sense to pull out healthcare providers that have a contractual relationship with CMS for Medicare and Medicaid payments. Similarly, federal contractors, which is a separate Biden mandate, but it's essentially the same thing. He actually issued it before he did the OSHA mandate, where he said if you do business, if you have a contractual relationship with the federal government, you have to vaccinate your employees. Well, what we did, we didn't just exempt out anybody that does business with the federal government. We put a process in place to where a company who contracts with the federal government can petition the comptroller for an exemption from this law, but they have to demonstrate and show proof in writing that their federal funding would be jeopardized, not just because there's a vaccine mandate, but that mandate is tied to them receiving federal money. So those were the two exemptions that we put into the bill to take people out: healthcare providers and those who contract with the federal government. We weren't happy about it, but we felt like if we didn't do that, it could jeopardize. Look, this bill's going to get sued. It's going to get taken to court, right? I mean, as soon as the governor signs it or it becomes law without a signature, whatever happens, I mean, the ink won't be dry if the governor signs it, and there's going to be leftists heading to federal district court to get this thing enjoined, right? Now, the good news is, you probably heard, after we passed the law that we passed, the bill that could become law, I hope it becomes law, that the Fifth Circuit, or Court of Appeals, has put a temporary injunction on the Biden mandate. Now, I said it from, and I'm looking at Lynn tonight, I'm not a lawyer, William's a lawyer, I don't play one on TV, and I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night. But I did say that, in my view, it is blatantly illegal and unconstitutional. If you don't believe me, how about the 28, 29, 27, however many state attorneys general that have said it is illegal and unconstitutional, and they plan to fight it with every fiber of their being. So that's good news, and it's good news that the Court of Appeals did issue that temporary stay, pending emergency hearings. We'll see what transpires with that. But regardless of what happens with the Biden mandate, hopefully this bill will become law, it'll be on our books, and it will protect people. Now, let me quickly talk about masks, because I know we want to get to questions. So we had a lengthy conversation about masks, and where we ended up with is we said that no governmental entity, city, state, county, school, whatever, can issue a mask mandate unless two very distinct conditions exist. Number one, relative to COVID, there's an emergency declaration from the governor. Number two, that you have a case rate of at least 1,000 per 100,000 individuals in the jurisdiction. Now, why did we do that, and where did we end up with that? Well, we looked at the data, we looked at the charts. There were a cumulative total of, I think, around 45 days over the last 21 months when the case rate in Tennessee did hit that level. So it is possible that it could reach that level, and if a local government chose to do so, they could issue a mask mandate. If it's a school, the principal of the school has to petition the school board and ask for it, but those conditions have to exist. We define them in the bill as severe conditions. And no one is under those conditions right now, not anywhere close. So if it becomes law, no more mask mandates in the state of Tennessee, schools, otherwise, anywhere else. People ask, why did we, that deserves a round of applause. People ask, why did we not ban private businesses from issuing a mask mandate? And this is a really kind of, I think, philosophical conversation, and one that I wrestle with. Before I became Majority Leader of the Senate, I served as Chairman of the Commerce Committee for 9 years in the state Senate. That's the business community. And I fought tooth and nail tooth and nail efforts to put mandates on businesses by government. For the government to come in and tell your business, you as a business owner, how do you run your business? I've used this example, and forgive me if you've heard it, I said it in committee. Let's say my wife and I own a jewelry store, and we're a little mom and pop business. It's just the two of us, and we run it, and we have for years. My wife is battling stage 4 cancer. She's undergoing chemotherapy and radiation and everything else. She's immunocompromised. Damn it, if I want to put a sign on my door that says you have to wear a mask to come into my business, I should be able to do so. It is my business, it is private property, and government's not going to tell me how to run my business. That's a fundamental premise that a lot of people believe. Some people said, oh, you came to Ford. I was the sponsor of the bill in the Senate. Ford never contacted me. Not one word from Ford. None whatsoever. Now, did some of the business community? Yes. And it's something that I wrestled with. And we ended up, and quite frankly, we would not have had the votes in the House and Senate if that mask mandate prohibition had existed on private businesses. Because there are those who believe, if you're a true conservative, you let people run their business the way they want to run their business. And that's where we ended up. So very quickly, another bill that was very important. You all may remember when the governor issued his executive order requiring a parental opt-out for masks in schools. Y'all remember that? And a certain district attorney who's not too far from right where we are said, I'm not going to enforce that. Well, whether you like it or not, the governor's executive order has the full force and effect of law. Prosecutors don't get to decide which laws they enforce and which ones they don't. They have prosecutorial discretion for certain instances, but that doesn't mean I like this law, I'm going to enforce it. I don't like this law, I'm not going to enforce it. That is scary. That's as scary as the President of the United States saying you got to get a shot. You start contemplating lawlessness when you start getting into that situation. So another bill said if that is happening, the Attorney General can petition the Supreme Court for a prosecutor or a district attorney pro tem to go in and prosecute any laws that are not being prosecuted by that district attorney. And then we have the authority in extreme circumstances, if we want to choose to do so, to contemplate removing someone from office if they decide to do that, such as a district attorney. So I'm going to stop there. That was a lot, I know. That was a lot, and I'm sure there's things that I should have talked about that I didn't. But the most fun part of this is a question and answer session. And the hard questions go to William. Because he's not, he's from up in Sumner County, and he serves in the House of Representatives. So if I don't want to answer it, you're going to answer it, okay?
I like to answer the question. What do y'all want to talk about?
Yeah. All right,
charge?
Is this mic working?
Yep.
All right. I got first things first. I got a lady first back here. I'll work my way there, but we're going to want to revisit what Jack was talking about in just a second. You ready?
Yes.
All right. Tell them who you are and what you want to ask.
Well, hello, can you hear me? My name is Brenda Lane. I'm a surgical nurse. I work at Midtown St. Thomas, and my people are affected by this mandate of vaccines. And I'm getting a lot of questions wrote down, but now I feel silly because you've answered most all of them pretty well. My biggest concern was that, would Governor Lee be able to appease Ford Motor Company and change all this? I guess the laws are not in the books yet, so it still could happen.
Hey, let me say this. So, can anybody hear me without the microphone? Yeah. Use the mic. Y'all good? Yeah. Yep. All right. In the back, you guys good? You want to grab? All right. Cool. All right. So everybody keeps saying Ford. Again, it's not a Ford Motor Company bill. We don't pass bills for one company. In fact, it's two companies that are in a joint venture, and we hope several others will be involved in that. It's a public-private partnership on that mega site. And so I, like Jack, never heard from the folks at Ford. Now, I've heard from a ton of businesses that are mom and pops and small, medium, and large businesses in my district that said exactly what Jack said. Hey, are you guys becoming what the Democrats are, which is big government getting all up in my business? We're in a restaurant that is owned by somebody. And I don't like wearing a mask. I think we're beyond the point where that is even remotely necessary. But at the same time, it's their business. They pay the rent here. They pay the staff here. They built this business up. And while both of us agree, and most of our colleagues do, that they should not require you to have a vaccine to come in here. By the way, the science of that, and working in the medical field, I think you can probably back me up on this, but every single immunologist and epidemiologist I've talked to said, look, we hoped that the vaccine would stop the spread of the virus. What it has done has reduced the symptoms that someone potentially would have if you get a vaccine. That's a good thing. But there's also risk with taking the vaccine. So talk to your doctor, make a determination on that risk and reward type analysis, okay? But because it reduces those symptoms, you have a lot more asymptomatic or non-symptomatic spread of the actual virus. So you get vaccinated, you don't get as sick, but you don't know you're sick, and so you go out in the public around other people and you're spewing it all over the place. So unfortunately, that's the situation that we're in. I think we all hoped that there was some magic pill or shot or whatever else that just made all this go away. That's not the reality of the circumstance. The Democrats are still pretending like it is. So we did not think that any business should require you to provide proof of vaccination, quite frankly, because that's not what's keeping this business or any governmental entity or anybody else safe. So it might keep you out of the hospital, but depending upon your medical conditions, it could cause adverse reactions. In some circumstances, it might put you in. That's a decision for you and your doctor to make. So we stayed away from that, but I never heard from the Ford folks. They're not even here yet. I mean, the bulldozers hadn't even started rolling over there, and y'all heard me brag about the fact, I love the fact that you know, we have some businesses, Ford being the keystone of that, they're coming into that area, but we don't do that. We listen to y'all. So we listen to our business community, and that's important because we want a robust business community here for jobs to be able to take off and folks make a good living. But at the end of the day, we serve the people in Tennessee, and that's who we heard from on vaccine mandates. I mean, we saw the president get out there and do exactly what Jack said, and say, look, we're going to intrude into people's businesses and lives and make that decision for you. That's not how this country works. So we pushed back hard against that and created a conflict between state and federal law. But we kind of stayed away from the other. By the way, I will tell you, it breaks my heart that this president and the federal government have given up on our healthcare heroes that I've heard from in my district, ma'am, that are just like you, that for 2 years have been on the front lines battling COVID. And dadgummit, if you got a nurse that's been in a COVID unit for 2 years, that feels like, in his or her opinion, that they shouldn't have to be vaccinated right now, and they're wearing dang spacesuits to work every day. Like, I'm not kidding. They are trussed up head to foot. If they don't want to give a vaccine and they want to continue to serve those COVID patients, my God, why is it anybody else's business? Why would you fire that person? That's your frontline person. So here's the position we're in. Either we're going to get them fired because we say, hey, by state law, you can't require proof of vaccination, and thus the feds are going to cut off the money that they provide through Medicare and Medicaid. By the way, your money. It's not federal money. The federal government doesn't have any assets. It all belongs to the people. But they've got a stranglehold on the fact that we send it to them, and then they send it back with all these strings attached. Right. And so we can either immediately cut the strings, and that same nurse loses their job because all the federal funding from Medicare and Medicaid goes away. I've already talked to the Attorney General's office about potentially suing the feds on that aspect as well. If you remember the first days of Obamacare, there were a lot of lawsuits about that very issue, where they threatened that if you don't expand Medicaid, that we're going to take all the Medicaid dollars away. The court system ferreted that out pretty well, and we hope that will happen here as well. So, but we're in a catch-22 where it's like, hey, look, if all that money goes away, that nurse loses their job because of that. But if they're forced to get a vaccine that they and their medical determination have decided not to, well, they're going to lose their job there. So we're hoping we have created this conflict and fight that we can now win in the court system, and we hope and pray that those that espouse the service on the federal level will get a clue and start listening to you guys and to these frontline workers and change course on this. Surely to goodness they learned something from Virginia. I mean, Virginia's been Democrat for years now and flipped in large part because they've lost their minds over there. They want to take over your lives. I went to Women Married for Law School. I'm serious. I got tons of friends in Virginia. Jason Miyares is one of them. I'm tickled he's going to be the new Attorney General of Virginia. I hope Virginia makes it to the time that all those folks get sworn in, because they've taken the wrong path. So a lot of this stuff we were able to fight here. A ton of it you guys have got to reach out to our national colleagues and get them fighting there for us. We've got to have that two-fold fight. Sorry, man, I don't know if that's what you're looking for or not.
One more, before we get away from the court thing. 5,700 jobs is what I heard. That's Ford.
And those are just, I'm sorry, that's just the direct with Ford.
Right. What's the ancillary stuff that's projected?
21,000 jobs for associated suppliers, contractors, everything else. Total estimated jobs at full build out about 27,000 jobs in a very economically distressed part of our state. And when people say, well, that doesn't do anything for my area, because William and I've had people say, do not me. But let me tell you something, your tax dollars are going right now to that part of the state. because they are economically distressed. This is going to help them and be transformational to that area.
For those of you that may not be aware and think that everything in Tennessee is like it is in Middle Tennessee, Tennessee actually has some counties on the nation's 100 most distressed counties list, and they're going that way. I just because you're going to get some feedback from some folks that says, well, we don't have to give them any incentives, this, that, or the other thing. Just be cognizant of the fact, 27,000 jobs in an environment that is literally on the nation's list of the 100 most depressed counties in the country. That's what that's done. And just so that you're armed with what you need to go out there with, those are the facts. They're not in dispute. All right, I want to follow up on something else real quick, but I'm going to warn you both right now. Okay? The next two questions are here. They're attorneys, and they're not blondes. All righty? You can't say.
I got left this blonde, man. Easy. I got a very long left up there, but it's blonde.
Miss Joni Bryant.
Things first.
I'll be real quick, and I just wanted to piggyback on the healthcare and CMS reimbursement contracts. Medicare and Medicaid are entitlement programs that those dollars follow the patient. So if patients are federally entitled to those dollars, you can't take them away. Was it ever a part of the discussion that you would challenge the federal government by saying you can't withhold federal dollars from the hospitals because they follow the patient?
Yes, that's absolutely where we're headed next. That was the argument under the Obamacare mandates. Can folks hear me better with this thing? I'm going to stick with whatever y'all prefer. But yeah, that's the legal argument that I think will be being next. That's what I'm asking the Attorney General to consider, and I think we should all consider. And any hospital or entity that's out there right now that wishes to go that route, I think it's a strong argument for that very reason. And I think in several of those Obamacare cases, we were able to be successful in court on that. I think it's crazy that we have to fight the very government that is supposed to serve us, but that's the position we're in right now.
Sorry, one more thing. Two things I think are the Biden mandate. If they were truly cared about people's individual health, then why in the world do they don't consider natural immunity? They make no provision for someone who's had COVID recovered. I heard today they're saying it's 27 times more effective than the vaccine. And yet they make no provision that if you've had it, you can show an antibody test, that you get exempted from the vaccine. So that just shows the absurdity. It's not about health, it's not about safety, it's about control. It's about control, and we're trying to control it. The other thing is, too, understand, this was a specially called session. We were there 3 days. We finished early on Saturday morning, about 2:30, and people have said, oh, you rushed this. You could have been there for 2 weeks. No, you can't, folks. We have 132 citizen legislators who have jobs and families. They don't plan to be in Nashville for 2 weeks in October. We had difficulties maintaining a quorum. Well, we didn't, but we have a supermajority. It takes 2/3 to maintain a quorum. And when you start losing a few Republicans because they've got a business trip planned that they can't get away from, or they got to get back to the district, the Democrats are sitting over here saying, whoa, they're getting close on their numbers, and then they can walk out, and we lose a quorum. So I saw someone online criticizing us that, oh, you rushed this. You should have taken 2 or 3 weeks. Well, you need to have some respect for our citizen legislators who have other lives. But my point in saying all of that is we got it done, we landed the plane. It's not perfect, and we're back in session in January. The fight will continue, I promise you.
Love it.
Okay, this is for William. Jack, you want to jump in?
Hey, it means it must be a tough question, right? So, absolutely.
Okay. The question is about the clawback, some of the clawback provisions for the project in West Tennessee. And I don't want anybody to be doing math here, but it sounds a little bit like when Saturn came to South Williamson County and the mantra was union jobs for Tennesseans, union jobs for Tennesseans. It got, everybody was expecting it to be great. Nobody knew UAW was going to close plants all over the country. Everybody from Michigan came in, and my understanding, and Jack will know if this is right or not, was it was 25 years before a Tennessean was hired at that plant, and that was a relative of someone who worked there. And it was a big culture shift. It wasn't, everybody's assimilated now, I hope, at least it's a red area. But people are dying to come to Tennessee. What makes you think that they're not gonna transfer out of these places and take all the jobs?
So, great questions, all of which I asked at the beginning of this. I mean, you're dead on it. And so, one, there's a 10-year clawback provision on this. So normally it's about a 5-year clawback provision on anything that we do through ECD. This is a 10-year. They've got to hold 90% of those jobs. So, I mean, you've got to be pretty close to that promised number. The beauty of going into that area is that this is an expansion plan for Ford, SK, and the other businesses that are coming. They're expanding into a market that doesn't currently exist. Now, I drive an F-150. It's a gas guzzler. It only gets about 15 miles per gallon. I've also got a right foot like a boat anchor. That is part of the problem. So an electric truck is really not. By the way, that was funnier than you guys gave me. I'm never going to drive an electric truck. I mean, like, until the range goes like 3 times what it is, and it can actually tow something, I mean, like, it's not something I'm interested in. But if you're an Amazon worker who's working downtown in a big office suite or whatever, and there's like 5,000 of those folks coming, an electric truck is like a cool thing to get. I mean, like, there's a lot of people out there that think that's neat, because it's a commuter car, but you're driving a pickup truck. So, I mean, when Tesla started making electric cars and they looked cool to the younger generation, and even older generation, I mean, it kind of was a game changer for electric cars. So it is not something I'm interested in. It's probably not something a lot of folks in this room are interested in, but there is a market out there. It's an expansion market. So for that reason, all these plants are in these other states. Until they move, they've still got to keep their folks there, okay? These are new hires and new people. And yes, I anticipate there may be some that move down, but what we hope, and I think this is something that will be a fight we need you guys in about 2 years, is until they actually get up to a certain level, I think it's 30% of the projected workforce, they can't vote on whether or not to be a union shop. Now, I grew up on a hog farm. We had 6,500 head of hogs when I was a kid. The only union was the livestock we managed, okay? Because if I didn't show up to work, we didn't get paid. If I didn't show up to work, stuff didn't get fed and died, and we went broke. So I've never really understood the union thing, because all I ever knew how to do was work, and I'm a small business now. So we have to fight that, and next year on the ballot, there's a right to work initiative that I hope you all vote for, enshrining in our Tennessee Constitution that we are a right to work state. That's going to send a huge message, I think, to anybody that's going to come. So all of those things being said, I don't want any of these unions here, especially UAW and some of the others. When they testified in front of the committee this year in one of our committees in the House, I'm probably on a list of theirs somewhere. I noticed their social media tags me on stuff. I asked them about how many of their folks embezzled money. I asked them about how many of their folks went to prison. I asked them how many of their folks drove their pension plan into the ground. I asked them about how many of their folks are, joined up with the corporations that they used to actually stand up for employees for. They didn't like me very much. I don't care, because what I care about is you guys and about Tennesseans. And I think most of these unions have long since outlived their usefulness, and in many, many, many instances are actually worse than the problem they saw off the face. And so, all that, we're going to fight tooth and nail for that to still be a free plant. I anticipate there'll be, legislation coming down the road and all that kind of stuff between now and then, but we've got a long time between now and that plant's done. What we want are the jobs in those areas and for folks to be able to flourish. But it's very different than the Saturn scenario that came along long before us. But much more accountability for businesses and much more opportunity there for us to maintain our right to work status. Great question, sir.
I want to tie something together that y'all talked about, because we have a local circumstance in our area where election security and the provision that you were talking about with the local DA that could be removed from office. For those of you who are not aware, the head of the Davidson County Election Commission, the chairman of the commission, was fired from his job of about 40 years because he would not recuse himself from a vote to the people, an initiative to the vote of the people for a tax increase of 34% plus or more in Davidson County. Now, one of the very largest clients that firm served happened to be directly impacted impacted by whether or not that initiative would get to the ballot or not. Historically in Nashville, we turned down the $9 billion effort at the polls. The prior mayor had tried to get for transportation. Now, the question becomes, we have a DA in Nashville who is much more politically aligned with the administration than perhaps the will of the people. Can you walk us through what a process would be? Because literally, I mean, it sent a chilling effect to anybody else that's out there that says if you don't do what we say, it can turn around and cost you your career as a public servant working on one of these efforts. If we have a DA who is unwilling to say, clearly there was an effort here, a conspiracy here that says to do this, how do you walk us through